What's up everyone? This is Nishi from MST.TV here. In today's episode, I want to talk a bit with you guys about Duel Devastator. So this is a really cool product that we're going to be getting next month, and it's kind of like the first of its kind, right? So on one hand, it's a reprint set, and we're going to be getting a lot of reprints of really popular, high demand meta cards. But on the other hand, it's kind of like a structure deck in that the same cards are going to be included in every single box. So you know exactly what cards you're going to be getting with each box that you buy. This set is going to be really great because it gives all players access to these meta relevant cards, allowing them to jump into competitive play more easily. Cards that are used in the meta are pretty often in pretty high demand, which causes their prices to jump up. However, this set means that players will now have access to all of these cards without having to shell out large amounts of money and without having to order them online or search at a dozen different locals for them. That being said, it is also important for players to know that are already holding onto copies of certain cards for them to be aware of what's going to be reprinted, as the reprints are almost certainly going to indicate an incoming drop in value. As a result, some of you guys as players may want to move cards that you're holding onto but not using, allowing you to get the maximum possible return for these cards and then buy them back after Duel Devastator has dropped. So some cards are still quite high in terms of price despite the confirmed reprint here, which is really odd, and it's something that I feel like you guys should try to take advantage of using the knowledge that I'm going to drop on you guys in this video. So I'm posting this video a little bit earlier than I was wanting to because I believe that in Farfa's interview with a Konami representative, he discussed how YouTube influencers in Europe got to see these cards from the set firsthand, and that we'd be getting that information released by those channels on September 20th, so about a week away. So this information is coming to you guys a bit sooner than I had anticipated, just so that you guys can all act as soon as possible. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what Duel Devastator is and what cards are confirmed to be included, and then we're going to kind of make some speculations about what other cards are going to be included in the set, and then try to identify what cards we should be looking to sell now. Let's get started. Alright, so Duel Devastator is a 56 card reprint set where every single card is an ultra rare. This is going to be coming out on October 11th, so about a month from now. Each box is going to have the exact same 56 cards. So 6 of those cards are going to be the Ghost Girl hand traps, right? So Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Ghost Belle and Haunted Mansion, and Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood, as well as the import from the OCG, Blood Blossom of the Afterlife. Chances are, if you've paid any attention to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh over the last few years, you know what at least a few of these hand traps do, and you understand the impact that they've had on the competitive meta. So aside from those 6 cards, the rest of the set includes 30 side deck cards and 20 extra deck cards. Now we have been given a very limited spoiler of what cards are going to be included in the set, but from what we can see, it's looking like most of the cards included are going to be at least somewhat decent and meta relevant. So this box is coming in at $40 US MSRP, which is honestly kind of crazy, right? At that price, right, $40 US divided by 56 cards in the set means that we're getting each card for roughly 71 cents before tax, including the Ghost Girls. And honestly, if you told me earlier this year that I would be able to pick up Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring for 71 cents, I would have called you just completely insane. So there are a couple implications of this though. Firstly, the cards that are reprinted in this set can only get so high, right? It's probably not something that you're gonna want to open 1,000 copies of this product, since every single box contains the exact same product, right? There's no randomness to it, and everyone has access to all of the cards just by buying one box. So realistically, unless all of the unrevealed cards are just completely awful, which I don't think is going to happen, this kind of caps what the secondary market price of a given card can be at around $5, right? At more than $5, I would definitely very strongly consider just going out and buying another box of this for myself, because I know that I'm getting so many other cards included with this. And then the other thing is that any cards that were previously expensive just because they were hard to get but are now reprinted here, those cards are absolutely going to tank in value, right? A big reason that cards can get expensive is because of how hard they are to get. And if they're being reprinted here and made so much more easily accessible, they're very, very likely to drop in price across the board. And I think that's something that you guys are going to notice as we go through this video. Alright, so first up, let's talk about hand traps. So all 5 of the Ghost Girl sisters are being included in this set with their alternate artworks, which is great. Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood is still relatively new, and this is actually going to be the first time that it's being reprinted. But as a card that has had really like little to no competitive impact on the meta, it's not really a point of concern. All that this tells us is that if you are still holding onto copies of this card, you should probably move them now. Now, on the other hand, the other hand traps have all had considerably bigger impacts on the meta, and each of them has been reprinted at least once. Despite these reprints, we still see some fairly high price points, right? So for example, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring has been reprinted as an ultra rare, super rare, and structure deck common, and despite that, the common is still like an $8 card. With Ghost Ogre, we're looking at least $5 for a copy for like the ultras, the super, or the premium gold print. And then Ghost Belle, despite only having one reprint, has seen much less play than Ogre and Ash Blossom, so its reprint is only sitting at around $4. The other one that we're not talking about here is Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, but is something that has seen quite a few reprints, yet not really seen any meta impact over the last like 2 years or so. I'm not really expecting the reprint to impact this card's value at all. That being said, what I am going to recommend is that if you still have the original highest rarity print of each of these cards, that we keep them. So we're looking at secret rare first edition copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Ghost Belle and Haunted Mansion, and Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, as well as the ultimate rare copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Those are relatively safe to hold on to, right? So even when cards like these are reprinted, the reprints tend to have minimal impact on the price of the highest rarity version of the card, and this is because a lot of them retain value strictly because of how much harder they are to find than other copies. However, at the same time, if you are holding onto any of those mid to lower rarity copies of these cards, I would definitely recommend trying to sell them as soon as possible. Even though we've seen like super rare and ultra rare Ash Blossoms hit like the $30 to $40 price point before, after this reprint, I'm fully expecting those values to drop to like anywhere from like $2 to $4 a piece, maybe $5 to $7 a piece, but really these cards are just so much more accessible now that I don't see them retaining that much value. These mid to low rarity cards, right, they often just retain value because the quantities of the item have started to disappear from the market, and players have gradually just like bought them up over time, which forces the price to go upwards. However, with the massive influx of cards that we're probably going to see from the release of Duel Devastator, I'm definitely expecting all of the mid to low rarity versions of these cards to tank, so I would try to get rid of them as soon as possible. Okay, so for confirmed reprints, the big ones that we have for monsters are Saryuja, Spell Canceller, and then to a lesser extent, Inspector Border. So these are all officially confirmed by Konami already. To me, the weird thing is that we've known about Saryuja and Spell Canceller reprints coming for like a month or two, but we're still seeing like all copies of Saryuja sitting at like $25 to $30, and then Spell Canceller is still holding like a $15 to $20 price tag, right? This is kind of weird to me because I would definitely have expected all of these prices to drop a lot more when people know that a card is being reprinted, especially given that over the last while we've had kind of like a lull in the competitive season. It's certainly possible that like a lot of people really wanted to hold on to the card to play with them, but I still think that the prices should be lower than what we're currently seeing. So if you don't need these cards over the next month or so, or you're just gonna like be playing at locals, I would definitely recommend looking into selling these cards. Also, Inspector Border is one of those cards that's still worth like $5 to $6 a piece at the moment, but mostly because it's only available as the original print and then the Megaton reprint. I'm pretty confident that after this reprint, it's going to kill the card's price and it's going to drop to like $2 to $3 at most. The thing to remember about all of these cards is that you're going to be able to buy them back very easily after Duel Devastator drops, right? So I personally feel like it would be in you guys' best interest to move them now and then just go for about a month or so without like playing them, and then you're going to be able to buy back your copies of Saryuja and Spell Canceller and Inspector Border at much lower prices later on. So there are a couple of other cards that were confirmed, right? We have Tornado Dragon and Abyss Dweller and the Synchro version of Trishula. However, even without these reprints, right, these cards are relatively cheap in terms of price, so they shouldn't have much of an impact on the secondary market, and I'm not going to talk too much about them here. Alright, and so for other cards that we have reprinted, we have Super Polymerization, Wave Motion Cannon, and Typhoon. So Super Poly is kind of like the one card that a lot of people have been clamoring for ever since it went to 3, and for very good reason. Like, the card is, in my opinion, like completely broken. It's just such a strong card. However, all of its printings are actually quite hard to find, and even the relatively recently released Super Rare from OTS pack is like $15 a copy, and the commons from the Cyber Dragon structure deck are like $10 to $12. Now, Super Polymerization isn't something that absolutely everyone will be playing, and I feel like most of the reason that Super Polymerization is so expensive now is because it's so hard to find those 3 copies of that everyone wants. So all across the board, I would recommend selling Super Polymerization, except for maybe the secret rares if you really want to keep them in highest rarity. But personally, like, I just sold mine as well. I'm fully expecting the prices of all copies of Super Polymerization to tank across the board. Typhoon is another card that is mostly just expensive because of how hard it is to get, right? It was hard to pull in the battle pack where it was debuted, and then it has 1 reprint, but it's from a relatively old OTS pack, so finding like a few copies of this card is actually fairly difficult, right? However, now that we finally have the card being reprinted, a big reason for that high price is now gone, so I am also expecting Typhoon to become a fairly cheap card all around. Now, Wave Motion Cannon is something that has kind of seen a bit of play with like those Mystic Mine decks, and then as a burn card, it can be sided inside decks for time. This card hasn't been reprinted in a really long time, and I believe that that's the primary reason that you're looking at such a high price point for this card, right? We're looking at like at least $5 for a common version, and it also has a Champion Pack Super Rare version, which is looking to be around $100 at the moment. Now, Champion Pack Super Rares are like some of the most collectible older cards and like really highly sought after. So even though the card is being reprinted here, we do not expect the Champion Pack price to change in value at all, aside from its natural price decline following the hype that it's seen over the last year. However, I do very strongly believe that the commons are definitely going to tank. They're going to be only like $1 or $2, as the card, which hasn't been reprinted in almost a decade, is being made super easily accessible once again. Alright, so for the rest of the video, what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of speculating. So the cards that I'm going to talk about are cards that I personally am expecting to be included in Duel Devastator, as they all kind of fit into either the category of side deck cards or generic extra deck cards. As a result, these are the cards that I'm looking to move my excess copies of, because I believe that there's a very high chance that they will see some drop in value after Duel Devastator is spoiled and released into the market. Okay, so when I think of side deck monsters, the first thing that jumps to mind is hand traps. So I am definitely expecting to see some pretty popular hand traps like Effect Veiler, Deity Crow, or Drollin Lockbird included in here. But what I'm also expecting is to see holo prints of some filler cards like Electric Virus or Puppet Plant. The big other card that I'm thinking of here is Saravis, the Ancient and Ascended, which is currently like an $8 to $10 card, and it kind of saw play as a hand trap to counter hand traps, saving your monster from cards like Effect Veiler or Infinite Impermanence. So if you do have copies of Saravis, I would be moving those now. So the other thing I think of from side deck monsters is cards with floodgate type of effects that single-handedly just like block off a single elementer aspect of the game. So we have Spell Canceller confirmed to be in the set, and on the flip side of that we have something like Jinzo, but then we could also see cards like Majesty's Fiend or Vanity's Fiend included in here, and we could finally see a reprint of something like Vanity's Ruler, which a lot of Necros players are really hoping for. Also, there are monsters that we like could see in here that aren't necessarily like those tribute summon floodgates, but still shut off parts of certain strategies, like Denko Sekka. So really, it kind of up to you guys to speculate which ones you guys think are going to be included in the set, and then act appropriately. In terms of spell cards being reprinted, I feel like there weren't really too many cards that could take up these slots. I usually see like a lot of monsters or trap cards inside decks, and even then a lot of spell cards that people may side are often included in the main deck in like going second strategies. So it could be that I'm completely overlooking something that's like really obvious, but there wasn't really anything that was super obvious to me that I wanted to include here. Mind Control is probably like the most likely thing to be included, as it has seen a bit of side deck play over the last few years. However, we've actually seen a lot of people including it in the main deck as people opt to place like different going second strategies or use it to out problematic cards that can't be destroyed like Thunder Dragon Colossus. Aside from that though, we're really just looking at like standard back row removal, right? So including cards like Mystical Space Typhoon, Twin Twisters, Galaxy Cyclone, Night Beam, or Cosmic Cyclone. Personally, I think that Cosmic Cyclone and Galaxy Cyclone would be the best choices here, since we haven't really seen those cards for a little while. And then of course we have Called by the Grave, which really does fit into that side deck category, although of course we did just see it reprinted in the 2019 Megatons, so I don't exactly think that it's necessarily going to be included here. Alright, so the trap cards are where things can get really cool, and I'm personally really excited to see what's going to be included here. So a lot of side deck trap cards that we see are typically floodgates, right? So the most notable one to increase in price recently is There Can Be Only One, which is currently like a $15 card, and honestly I think there's like a 99% chance it's included in here. But there are other floodgates that we could see included, right? We could see Rivalry of Warlords and Gozen Match, both of which are really popular. We could finally see holo prints of Shadow and Light Imprisoning Mirror, and then we also have cards like Macrocosmos, Imperial Iron Wall, or Imperial Order, just to name a few. Aside from those, Evenly Matched, in my opinion, is like a staple side deck card, right? I love this card. It punishes like those players that overcommit to the field if you don't have any way to like negate Evenly Matched, and it can like completely turn the game around. But like at the same time, honestly, it's a really bad card if you're going first, and it still can be negated by things like Dawn Dragster or Solemn Judgment. I think that this might be a bit like hopeful of me, but I really do think that Evenly Matched is going to be included in this set because there has been a noticeable uptrend in the amount of play that Evenly Matched has seen over the last little while, so I don't think it would be completely crazy if the card were to be included in here. Remember, we have already seen the card get 2 reprints, one in the Megaton and then once as an ultra rare in, I believe, Dual Power. And then finally, I do think that we're going to see a couple of different counter traps included in here as well. So personally, I think that the Solemn Brigade would be really cool to have here. So Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, and then Solemn Judgment, and maybe like Solemn Scolding. I don't know how they're feeling about that. There's some of the more like iconic cards in the game. Like I feel like everyone knows what Solemn Judgment does at the very least, and like probably Solemn Strike. Especially ever since Solemn Judgment went to 3 on the most recent ban list. Alternatively, right, like I could see them giving a rarity bump to some of those more niche counter trap cards like Curse Seal of the Forbidden Spell, or something like Magic Drain, cards that like have seen that like occasional side deck play but haven't really been super prominent in any of the given metas. In my opinion, those would be really cool to see. I feel like there are a lot of different cards that would be cool to see reprinted in this set, so I'm excited to see them either way. Okay, and then finally for extra deck monsters, right? There's 20 slots, but honestly, there are just so many different possible extra deck monsters that we can choose from. Like, it's impossible to narrow it down. But what I'm thinking roughly is that like 20 extra deck monster slots, we're gonna get about 5 fusions, 5 synchros, 5 Ixies, and 5 link monsters. Probably like a bit fewer in terms of fusions and a bit more in terms of links, but like, who knows, this is just kind of a ballpark, right? So we're gonna zip through these relatively quickly. So for fusions, we have, of course, the most powerful monster that they've released in a long time, Sea Monster of Theseus. I'm pretty sure it's going to be in there. Aside from that, we have a couple of super polymerization targets like Mud Dragon of the Swamp or Salamangreat Violet Chimera, even though Violet Chimera isn't really like a generic extra deck monster, it's still a super poly target, even though those cards are also relatively new. And then finally, maybe we'll get a chance to see like an old fusion monster get reprinted, something like Kaminari Attack, which has been worth a few dollars for the last little while because it does see play in Thunder Dragon. But like really in terms of like generic fusion monsters, there's not too many of them that we can include here. So in terms of synchros, I was inclined to just mention more like standard generic cards that are pretty obvious, like Stardust Dragon or Black Rose Dragon. However, I feel like we've actually gotten just so many reprints of each of those cards recently, and it would be really unnecessary. So the ones I'm actually looking at here are their counterparts, Black Rose Moonlight Dragon and Stardust Spark Dragon, cards that maybe aren't as well known or popular, but honestly provide just as much utility and are still very viable generic synchro monsters. The thing about synchros is that I feel like all of the really good ones that are worthwhile have already been reprinted multiple times and wouldn't really warrant a spot here. I guess a notable exception would be something like Cyframe Lord Omega, but even that, it has already been reprinted and is currently limited, right? So even then, it's like still a good generic synchro monster that a lot of decks could utilize, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it here, especially because it's trending up towards that like $8 to $10 price point again. But yeah, aside from that, who knows? Alright guys, so for Xyz monsters, there are quite a few good generic Xyz monsters that could be included in here, but like the problem that I feel is, again, all of the ones that are really good and generic have already been reprinted at least once, maybe multiple times, so it's hard to necessarily say which ones are going to be included here. Daigusto Emerald is, in my opinion, the most obvious one, and I do really strongly believe that you guys should be moving all of your excess copies of Daigusto Emerald while it is still relatively high, because it did just come off the ban list recently, but it hasn't really had an impact on the meta whatsoever. Gaga Cowboy is something that could be included just because it is a utility option for games that do go into time. In terms of other cards, it kind of depends on like how generic we want these extra deck monsters to be, right? I do think that Totally Awesome is a card that should be included strictly because of how it is currently like relatively expensive. And if I were Konami, I would want to give players access to this card, especially with Marincess being a deck that's getting more and more support as we have more sets coming on. It's kind of generic, right? It's 2 level 2 Aqua monsters, and there's no like name requirement that's attached to it. Ultimately though, I don't know what Konami is going to decide to give us. One other thing I want to note here is that personally, I'm hoping that Time Thief Redoer is included in the set as an ultra rare. I think that that card would look absolutely beautiful as an ultra rare, so I have my fingers crossed for that. Alright, and of course we have Link monsters. See, the problem with trying to predict the Link monsters here is that Link monsters are just so new, right? So everything has either been reprinted already or it's too new to justify including it here. So for instance, I want to include cards like Topologic Bomber Dragon or Borolo Dragon here. I think they'd be very good fits. However, those cards have both already seen reprints. There are a few odd cards that haven't seen reprints, but they're already relatively inexpensive, cards like Trigate Wizard. And then of course there are cards that I would love to see reprinted that are generic, but are just too new to be included here. I mean, it would be amazing to see a card like Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, or Appaloosa, or Salamangre Almirage included in here. But really, those cards just came out like a couple of months ago for the most part, and it's pretty unrealistic to see them reprinted in here. So like, to be honest, this is the part that I'm least sure about. You guys' guess is just as good as mine as far as what Link monsters are going to be included in this set. So one last thing I want to note here is that I personally do not believe that any extremely expensive cards are going to be included in this set, despite what players may want. I think it'd be really cool if something like Infinite Impermanence or Phantasme or Pot of Extravagance were all reprinted so that like all players have access to them really easily. However, I don't think that this is the set where that's going to happen, right? Like, honestly, the fact that you're getting these 56 cards for $40 means that they're not going to include too many like really high dollar chase cards, right? Because they need those cards to sell other product, right? You're already getting a lot of value from just like the hand traps and then cards like Super Polymerization and Saryuja. So I don't think it's very realistic to expect to see those more expensive cards included here. Realistically, we're looking at getting those reprints in something like Battles of Legend or the Mega Tins next year, where they can be reprinted as chase cards that encourage people to open up more product. Alright guys, so that is it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that you guys are just as excited for Duel Devastator as I am. At my locals, we do have a few guys that are just kind of like getting into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! So I know that they're going to be wanting to pick up cards from this. I know myself, I am going to be picking up a few boxes just to kind of replenish my card pool and maybe give away a lot of the extra stuff that I have to some of the younger kids that attend my locals that maybe don't have access to as much cards as I do. Anyways, that is it for this video. Please guys, if you liked the video, please make sure you hit that thumbs up button for me, and be sure to comment down below what cards you guys are looking forward to hopefully seeing in Duel Devastator. And of course guys, make sure you hit the subscribe button to see all the latest content from MST.TV. And yeah, so until next time, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.